Hello, and welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today we're tackling a huge question. How do you rebuild a country after it's been torn apart by war? We see images of cities turned to rubble, and it seems impossible. But from the ashes of history's worst conflicts, some of the world's strongest economies have been born. It's a story of devastation, but also incredible resilience. So how do you go from rubble to resurgence? Let's dive into the fascinating economics of starting over. First, let's get our heads around the sheer scale of the damage. War isn't just a political event, it's the ultimate wealth destroyer. We're talking about roads, bridges, power plants, schools, hospitals, all pulverized. The cost to repair this physical damage can be 2 or even 3 times a country's entire economic output before the war. A typical conflict can shrink a nation's GDP per capita by 9%, but the most brutal wars? They can wipe out 40 to 70% of income levels. Take Syria, for instance. Between 2010 and 2023, its economy is estimated to have shrunk by a staggering 84%. Beyond the visible destruction, there's the invisible toll, the loss of human capital. People are displaced, skilled workers flee in a brain drain, and lives are lost. This cripples a nation's ability to produce anything, creating a vicious cycle of poverty and instability that seems impossible to break. So where do you even begin? Rebuilding isn't just about putting back the bricks that fell. It's about building back better. And it turns out, there's a sort of playbook. The absolute first step? Security. Nothing happens without it. You can't run a business, go to a job, or invest money if there's chaos in the streets. So, establishing security and the rule of law is priority number 1. Once that's in place, you tackle the economy. War often leads to hyperinflation and worthless currency. So, you have to stabilize it, maybe by creating a new currency or pegging it to a stable one, like the US dollar. The new government has to get a handle on its finances, figure out how to collect taxes, and pay its bills. It's like performing emergency surgery on an entire country's financial system. You can't talk about post-war recovery without mentioning the legendary Marshall Plan. After World War II, Western Europe was in ruins. The United States stepped in with what was officially called the European Recovery Program. They provided over $13 billion. That's about $140 billion in today's money, to help rebuild, and it worked spectacularly. The GDP of the countries that received aid grew by 35%, and trade between them shot up 80%. But the genius wasn't just the money. The plan required European nations to cooperate on how to spend it. This forced them to work together, fostering economic integration that laid the groundwork for what we now know as the European Union. It was a masterclass in strategic aid. History is full of incredible comeback stories. Let's look at Japan. After World War II, it was utterly devastated. But its recovery was so fast, it's called the Japanese economic miracle. With help from the American occupation, they reformed land ownership and dismantled the military. The government then focused all its energy on what they called the inclined production mode, prioritizing essential materials like steel and coal to fuel industrial growth. Combined with a surge in the workforce and a laser focus on technology and exports, Japan rose to become a global economic powerhouse. By 1956, just over a decade after the war, its economy had already surpassed pre-war levels. Then there's the more recent and equally astonishing story of Rwanda. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi left the nation shattered, but in the years since, Rwanda has embarked on a remarkable journey. The government focused on rebuilding institutions, promoting reconciliation, and investing in key sectors like agriculture, tourism, and tech. Between 1995 and 2008, Rwanda's economy grew at an average of over 8% a year, pulling millions out of poverty. It has become a model for sustainable development, a true phoenix from the ashes. Of course, these nations rarely do it alone. The international community, through organizations like the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF, plays a huge role. They provide loans, technical advice, and peacekeeping forces. But international aid can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's poorly managed, and ironically, a flood of aid can signal to private investors that a country is still too unstable for business, scaring away the very thing it needs for long-term growth: foreign direct investment, or FDI. Ultimately, a country needs to transition from being dependent on aid to attracting investment. FDI brings not just money, but technology, expertise, and connections to global markets. That's the real key to sustainable, long-term success. This brings us to today. The ongoing war in Ukraine presents a modern and daunting reconstruction challenge. The damage is already estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. The world is watching, and the lessons from the Marshall Plan, Japan, and Rwanda will be vital. Ukraine will need a mix of substantial aid, deep institutional reforms, and a major push to attract foreign investment. The path from rubble to resurgence is always long and winding. The risk of falling back into conflict is real. In fact, for almost half of all post-conflict countries, their economy is still smaller than it was before the war, even 25 years later. But the stories we've talked about today prove that recovery is possible. The economics of post-war rebuilding is a powerful testament to human resilience, and a hopeful reminder that even from the deepest devastation, a brighter future can be built. That's all for this episode of G Fun Facts Online. Join us next time as we explore another fascinating corner of our world. Thanks for listening.